Self-inquiry is ultimately about turning the attention back on itself. It's when consciousness is conscious of itself. From this position, we enter a state of non-conceptualisation. We can say the mind is pure at this point. There's actually no way to do this other than in the way I described, turning the attention back on itself. If you're a spiritual seeker, if you're looking for this understanding, then all you can do is keep looking, and eventually you'll stumble upon it. There's no path to it. It's like saying, what is the path to experiencing the colour red? There's no path to that. You either experience it or you don't. If you've never experienced the colour red, then there's no path to experiencing it other than experiencing the colour red. So there's nothing mysterious about this. There's nothing mystical about it. It's something which either happens or it doesn't. There's no path to it. And once you've stumbled upon this, then you can embark on spiritual practice. Then we can say you're embarking on a path, if you like, to establish yourself more completely in this perspective. This usually takes practice, because we've got all our usual tendencies which lead the attention to be involved in all the things that are presented to our awareness. And this is when spiritual practice comes in. Spiritual practice helps us to establish ourselves in this ultimate state whereby the attention is attending to itself. Many of the stories in the Yoga Vasishta are examples of the process of self-inquiry, this realization which divests the attention of all the distractions which limit it, and which turn the attention, allow the attention to rest in itself. In the previous chapters, we had an example of a common mistake which somehow believes that following spiritual practices gets us to this state of self-inquiry. For example, the yogic practice of pranayama, which involves breath control. The Yoga Vasishta stated often enough that this practice is of no consequence to self-inquiry. It is not self-inquiry. To follow on from my previous analogy, it's a bit like saying, well, if you can't experience the colour red, try experiencing the colour blue first. You know, it's of that kind of order. The Yoga Vasishta stated often enough that practices like pranayama do not lead to self-inquiry, and yet in the previous chapter we had this very example, that practices like pranayama can lead to self-inquiry. They cannot. I gave a quote from Ramana Maharshi, which is included at the beginning of section 6 in the Yoga Vasishta, saying that practices like pranayama, repetitions of mantras and so on, are useful for the immature mind. And this is putting these things into the proper perspective. You either do self-inquiry or you don't. Sometimes it's not always clear that you've got a choice. Sometimes your mood might be such that you cannot do self-inquiry. You might be in a state of anger, lust, or whatever. Ideally, you can use self-inquiry to take you beyond that. But if not, if your mind is what we might call an immature state, then why not do practices like pranayama, meditation, physical yoga, hatha yoga, or anything else, any kind of devotions, if that's what helps you at that particular time. So these practices do have a role to play, but only in dealing with the mind, in what I've referred to previously as mental development or mental health. These things do have their role to play, but so does anything. So does listening to music, or going to the gym, or just being sociable even. All these things can have a good effect on us. But they are not self-inquiry. They are not spiritual in themselves. So we need to be quite clear about this distinction. Self-inquiry can be practiced at any time. But if you're caught up in the throes of a particular mood, if you're depressed or something like that, then it's very, very difficult. You can certainly attempt to practice self-inquiry, and self-inquiry might actually do the trick. But if your mood is too strong, then you're going to have to use some other technique to deal with your mood. So sometimes the mind is mature, sometimes it is immature, and we need to be quite clear what our condition is.